Honesty is usually treated like a verbal skill. It's something you say or something you finally admit, something you put into words after you've been sitting with it for a while. But honesty doesn't really begin there. It begins in the body. So, before we go further, if you haven't already, pause this video, go down to the description, and take the Somatic Skins quiz. There's a link in the description. Not everybody approaches honesty, pressure, and exposure in the same way, and so knowing how your nervous system organizes will change how you hear and apply everything I'm about to say. All right, one of the core principles in Becoming the Grand Formidable, our upcoming book, is simple. Honesty is courage. But I want to be really clear about what that actually means when we use it, because it can sound moral. And we don't really mean honesty as a virtue. We mean honesty as something physiological. After all, people don't always hold a lie just because they want to deceive. They might lie first to themselves because their nervous system hasn't learned how to stand inside what it already knows. So it edits. It might say, "I'm fine," while the breath refuses to deepen. It'll nod yes while the body is subtly pulling backward. It keeps moving forward while the spine no longer wants to organize around the life being lived or the choices being made. And this isn't just performative body language, because when we moralize this as dishonest in character or superficial body language, we forget that it has a physiology. And once you see it that way, the question changes. It's no longer, how do I be more honest in my life? It becomes, where does my body refuse to meet what I already know? And that is the easy part to miss. Because honesty is first a decision to tolerate nothing less than alignment. Then, honesty is exposure. And that's where courage comes in. It's the willingness to be experienced and seen, not only by the world and others, but by yourself. And when truth approaches, the body reacts before the mind can explain anything. You can feel it, whether the breath shortens or the jaw sets or the structure collapses, the eyes harden or shift a little bit, or the spine starts to twist or brace. What's happening there is the language of physiology. The system is registering a change or a charge and is already compensating for perceived cost. Because honesty, alignment, changes things. It changes relationships. It'll change identities. It changes the agreements that you've been living inside. So the nervous system tries to preserve stability at all costs, and very often it does that through distortion. Not big lies, not small ones, half-truths, delays, softening, over-explaining, what we might call the dirty yes. Agreeing to something that you don't actually agree to, calling it maturity or keeping the peace. And yes, sometimes that can be discernment. But often when we sit with it deeper, it's fear wearing a posture. And that is why honesty, I might even say wholeness, takes courage. Not because it's hard to speak, but because it can be hard to stay organized when speaking, choosing, acting becomes costly. And this is where applied somatics really matters, because there's a moment of truth, and almost everyone recognizes this if they slow down, where the body begins to refuse to participate in a context, in a dynamic, or bigger, even in a life that is still being verbally maintained. And you can feel it in that moment when it happens. You might say you're okay, and the breath won't cooperate. You try to keep an old story intact, tell it in the same way and live it, and the chest just feels heavy. You try to maintain a role that you've outgrown, and the spine just won't stack cleanly. You can keep performing and justify, but it takes more effort. And this is one of the reasons that we train honesty in the spine. We call it the line of dignity between heaven and earth. And this is critical, not because posture is symbolic. I'm not necessarily talking about metaphysics, but because structure tells a story. You can intellectualize discomfort, you can make meaning, you can explain your patterns so beautifully, but you can't permanently out-talk your body into organizing around something or participating in something that it no longer believes. The spine will tell the truth about what you can actually bear and what real alignment is. And so when we say honesty is courage, we're pointing to a very specific capacity. Can you hold structure when you're exposed to load? Can you stack upright without forcing rigidity? Can you stay open and breathing without collapsing? Because you can be upright, but it's armored, or you can be open, but you fold when pushed. You can tell the truth, but it comes out sharp. Or you can be kind, but really compliant because you disappear in the stronger presence of another. Honesty lives in the middle, structure and openness at the same time. And that combination, especially under pressure, uncertainty, and pushback, is rare, but it is trainable. You can see this clearly in relationships and leadership. Take a situation where you might know exactly what to say, exactly what to do, and then when the moment arrives and the nervous system begins being activated, you bargain. You soften, you second guess, you manage the other person's reaction, you push, you force, and again, you might call it being considerate or sensitive or strong, but the cost will show up later. Or on a macro level, this might show up where this is a person whose life technically works. Your calendar is dialed in. You've hacked your productivity. You're good. But the body feels stiff. The life feels small. The breath feels heavy. The posture has a subtle resignation to it. And it's not just a passing mood. It's become a habitual state of systemic organization. At that point, it's easy to say, you don't know why you feel that way. But many times, you do know why. You know exactly what you want or need. But to admit clarity would mean then that you might have to do something with that. And again, that's the moment of truth held in the nervous system, because maybe you aren't sure you have the capacity to stay with what you know long enough to let it reorganize you or your life. One important distinction before I close this conversation for today: honesty is not the same thing as dumping everything you feel and think into the world or onto a person. There's a version of truth-telling, and it's pretty popular right now, that's just untrained activation. It's raw, it's unstructured, and sometimes it's destructive. And that's not necessarily what I'm talking about with courage. It is discharge. Honesty requires centering structure, focus, and the breath, and reading the signs when those three regulators don't hold. It's the capacity to remain accurate, even where that's piercing, and remain in relationship with yourself, the situation, and the other without distortion. This is why we train it in the body, because the body will show you exactly where you distort long before you're ready to admit it in words. So when we say honesty is courage, this is what we mean. A body that can bear reality. A nervous system that can stay present and responsive when exposure arrives. a spine that can hold structure, that line of dignity, without turning it into stiff armor. A breath that can drop when it would be easier to stay shallow and avoid. Because if you can't hold honesty in your physiology, you'll keep negotiating it with your own perception and mind too. You'll keep making choices that you can explain, but that don't feel correct. And you'll keep calling it maturity. When honesty becomes embodied, something shifts. Distortion becomes physically uncomfortable. The system doesn't want to carry it anymore. And honesty stops being something that you're trying to do, and it becomes something you return back to. That doesn't mean it's constant clarity or uniform calm. It's an underlying alignment that you can feel when you lose it, restore when you return, and bring the full self, the self that reality requires, to the moment. And that is why honesty is courage. Not to speak, but to stay with what is happening. If this is landing and you want to go deeper within these practices, tools, and training, you'll find some important links below. First, take the Somatic Skins quiz if you haven't already. It gives you a precise reading on how your system organizes under pressure and makes all of this work far more usable. You can also order the Somatic Skins and Becoming the Grand Formidable, our 2 primary curriculum books. The links are in the description below. Specifically in this video, Becoming the Grand Formidable goes much deeper into principles like honesty is courage, structure under exposure, and precision under real pressure. And then third, if you want a practice environment, not just concepts, consider joining us for a season in the Prestige. It's an applied training ground for building the kind of nervous system integrity that can actually hold a big life, your work, and relationships without distortion. All of those links are below, and you're more than welcome to reach out directly. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for hanging out with me for a bit. If you received some value, please do consider liking, subscribing, commenting. It really helps the channel. Till next time.